Welcome along, fellow time travelers and strange historians. This time around, we're going to travel back in time to 1966 and a bit beyond, and I'm going to explain to you why so many Beatles fans hate Yoko Ono. This is part 1. Before I begin, please like and share the show and subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell. Now please join me around the campfire.
See, maybe for the show, you would just say George was sick.
Well, if he leaves, he leaves.
Yoko Ono is one of the most polarizing public figures in American history, despite not being a lawyer, politician, or convicted felon.
Yeah, if he doesn't come back by Tuesday, we get clapped. What? What? Anything you say, dear.
John! John! Yes!
Throughout my career, many who aren't avid Beatles fans have asked me why Yoko Ono garners such strong reactions from Beatles enthusiasts. Having authored numerous books on John Lennon's residences and produced videos about the Beatles and their music, I've kind of become a go-to source for insights on this topic. And the reasons that people cite for their hatred of Yoko Ono are numerous. It's important to note that I don't necessarily endorse these reasons. Yoko Ono and I share mutual friends and acquaintances, and I've met her personally and she was gracious. In fact, she played a crucial role in ensuring the accuracy of the information for my book on Tinhurst Park. And in return, I assisted her with her book Imagine some time ago. And as of the time of this recording, Yoko Ono is still alive. So, it is never my intention to speak ill of the dead, and it's also not my intention to speak ill of the living. However, given the ongoing curiosity about Yoko Ono, here are the explanations that many are looking for. John and Yoko first crossed paths in 1966. At that time, John was 26 years old, married, and the father of a 3-year-old son named Julian. And of course, he was enjoying a flourishing career with his band, the Beatles.
Beatles! Money!
Yoko, on the other hand, was a 32-year-old married woman on her second failed marriage, and, it's been said, had a history of depression, attempted suicide, and having been committed to a mental institution. At the time, she was the mother of a 3-year-old daughter named Kayoko. She was a self-described avant-garde artist in something called the Fluxus movement that no one except those who were in it ever heard of. And she was in a perpetual state of financial difficulties. Many Beatles fans perceive Yoko as just another person attempting to make a name in the world of conceptual art without any genuine artistic talent. Struggling financially, Yoko sought support from patrons. Initially, she approached Paul McCartney, proposing that he sponsor her or provide her with his original song lyrics, which she intended to pass on to her friend, John Cage.
C'est pas
Beautiful. I like that.
Do you like it?
Yes, it got right through to me.
Well, I just go on and on for hours.
Yes.
Finding her to be pushy and annoying, McCartney suggested that she contact John Lennon instead, thinking that his background in art school might make him more receptive to her peculiar ideas. This marked the beginning of Yoko Ono's pursuit of John Lennon, seeking financial support for her artistic endeavors. Beatles fans believed that she and her husband, Tony Cox, would have been better served by securing stable employment rather than depending on the hospitality of others, which often ended with them being asked to leave or facing eviction from their apartments. Many Beatles fans felt that as a 32-year-old married mother, Yoko should have adopted a more responsible lifestyle rather than constantly being broke, unable to pay her bills, and trying to be an avant-garde artist when there likely was little if any financial security in doing that.
Anyone who's interested could come up on the stage and try to fly off from these ladders.
Could all the people in the bags sit down on the stage, please?
John and Yoko first met at an art gallery on the eve of Yoko's exhibit there. John found her amusing, but was not particularly impressed with her or her work. Yoko acted as if, and later claimed, that she was unaware of who John Lennon was, despite previously trying to contact him by phone, and after bugging Paul McCartney for money, and she even performed at a theater owned by Brian Epstein, and meeting with the Beatles' longtime friend, Tony Bramwell. Beatles fans believe that John Lennon, known for his emotional vulnerability, was susceptible to manipulation, and many feel that Yoko Ono leveraged this to her advantage, benefiting significantly from their relationship, perhaps more so than he ever did. After all, as a result, Yoko Ono gained worldwide fame and considerable wealth simply by being in a relationship with John Lennon. In contrast, John Lennon experienced significant losses, including his first wife and their son, as well as priceless connections with family, friends, and colleagues. His life took a darker turn as he struggled with heroin addiction and, over time, appeared increasingly solemn and irritable, even losing the creative spark for which he was once celebrated. Aiming to escape his business troubles and focus on songwriting, John traveled to Rishikesh, India, in early 1968, along with other members of the Beatles, to study transcendental meditation under Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And during this period, Yoko Ono, still married and still having a child, sent John Lennon numerous letters. Beatles fans contend that she might have been better off spending that time with her own young daughter and her husband instead of pursuing a relationship with a married man. This behavior is one of several reasons why Beatles fans harbor negative feelings towards Yoko Ono. While it's acknowledged that the state of her own marriage and her personal choices are her own affair, many fans believe that she should not have pursued a married man with a child, especially while seemingly neglecting her own daughter. Beatles fans value honesty and feel misled by claims that Yoko Ono was wealthier than John Lennon due to her supposed affluent background. While it's true that Yoko's family was once very wealthy, they essentially lost everything during World War II. During his lifetime, Yoko's father was a bank executive, a fact often exaggerated, as though he owned the bank itself. Far from being Meyer Rothschild, the founder of the Rothschild banking dynasty in the late 18th century. And so yeah, her father was a banking executive, but Beatles fans have been led to believe that he was practically J.P. Morgan. In fact, during the war, Yoko's family faced severe hardships, even begging for food while carting their possessions in a wheelbarrow. Yoko later said that this tough period shaped her aggressive demeanor and sense of being an outsider. There were even accounts of her mother taking valuable items to the countryside to exchange for food, including one instance where a German-made sewing machine was traded for over 100 pounds of rice in order to sustain the family. And so she wasn't exactly rolling in dough throughout the course of her childhood, as Beatles fans were led to believe. Beatles fans are also offended that they were repeatedly misled about her musical skills by she and John. For example, Beatles fans were led to believe that Yoko Ono was a classically trained pianist, which supposedly made her more musically talented in many ways than John Lennon. And so she didn't need him in order to establish a musical career for herself. However, like many children in the 1930s and 1940s, Yoko simply took piano lessons during her childhood, which did not extend into a formal education into her teenage years or adulthood. Yes, during her piano lesson she played classical music, but this fact isn't particularly extraordinary. Styles like boogie-woogie, ragtime, blues, and honky-tonk, which were not prevalent in Japan at the time, might have been deemed more impressive had she learned those. But a young girl learning to play classical music on the piano in those days were essentially a dime a dozen. Beatles fans argue that if Yoko is truly a prodigious classically trained pianist, there would eventually be some evidence of her proficiency, yet no such proof has ever surfaced. The rumors continue to swirl around Yoko Ono and John Lennon. According to Tony Bramwell, by January 1968, Yoko began to make daily calls to Apple headquarters in an effort to contact John Lennon. Frequently, she would also appear at the offices in person right after calling. Many of the times, John Lennon would know she was down there and he would ignore her. But on other occasions, he would go down to the reception area and hang out with her. Often, it's been said, while under the influence of one drug or another. Sometimes, their meetings extended to lunches or dinners. John's driver, Les Anthony, later recounted driving John in his Rolls-Royce to the apartment that Yoko shared with her husband and daughter. Allegedly, Yoko and John would sometimes use the back seat of his car for intimate encounters, either parked on the street in front of the apartment where she lived, or while being driven around London. Afterwards, Yoko would return to her family upstairs as casually as if she had stepped out to buy a donut. This pattern of sexual behavior had been established well before the well-known account given by John and Yoko, where they claimed that as the sun rose, they had their first intimate, loving, beautiful, sexual encounter while his wife and child were away on vacation.
Yoko?
John.
Yoko!
John.
Yoko!
John. 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 John.
Adding insult to injury, after spending the night with John, Yoko reportedly wore one of Cynthia's robes and sat in the kitchen, brazenly waiting for Cynthia to return home and discover her presence, and to know that Yoko had sex with Cynthia's husband in Cynthia's home while Cynthia wasn't there. Beatles fans around the world widely condemn this behavior as heartless. After all, what kind of woman does that to another woman? Having an affair with a married man is one thing, but what kind of woman, Beatles fans always wondered, would rub it in the face of the man's wife? Moreover, it's widely acknowledged among Beatles fans that Cynthia Lennon was a kind, wonderful, and talented woman and artist who did not deserve the treatment she received from her husband and Yoko Ono. Beatles fans also take offense at being disparaged, and they have felt insulted as a result of John and Yoko attributing their dislike for Yoko to racism and misogyny. In fact, it seems that John and Yoko even made the same accusations against his fellow bandmates and those who he worked with. Now, for context, Paul McCartney had been linked to a woman of African descent, and George Harrison famously dated Estelle Bennett, the sister of Ronnie Spector, who was of African American and Cherokee heritage. To suggest that three of the Beatles, and their wives, and their families, and all their associates, and everybody else disliked Yoko Ono at the time because she was a woman or because she was Asian seemed unfounded to many fans.
John!
I'm afraid he's not in.
John! John! John!
They view such accusations as baseless. The logic among Beatles fans was straightforward. If you accuse someone of being a racist or misogynist or both, and they aren't, they don't care what you said, and they think you're a fool. And if you accuse someone of being a racist and misogynist, and they are, they also don't care what you think. And they also will think you're a fool. And that's how countless Beatles fans feel about John Lennon and Yoko Ono. That they were a couple of fools for making bizarre assumptions about why they dislike Yoko Ono. After all, if a Caucasian woman behaved in the same exact way that Yoko Ono did, Beatles fans would have hated her just the same. And if a man behaved the same way that Yoko Ono did, well, they would have hated him too. So it's never had anything to do with her being a woman or being Asian. That was just an excuse that John and Yoko made up in order to insult and belittle Beatles fans. Clearly, it never occurred to them that maybe Yoko Ono was just an unlikable person.
He's busy!
John! John! John!
Yes?
Over time, John and Yoko modified their claims, later suggesting that the animosity towards Yoko stemmed from her being a strong woman, a term that puzzled many. This assertion implied that the Beatles and their circle were dismissive of all women, portraying them all as weak, all except Yoko Ono, who was the only strong one that they ever knew. And so that's why they disliked her. Beatles fans found it contradictory to label Yoko as a strong woman, given her actions, pursuing a married man while neglecting her own husband and child, repeatedly appearing uninvited at his home and workplace, and appearing to be overly dependent and submissive in her interactions with him.
John!
Do it.
John! John! John!
This portrayal did not align with many people's definition of strength, further straining her image among Beatles fans. As I wrap up part 1 of why Beatles fans hate Yoko Ono, I want to touch on what may really have always been bothering Beatles fans, perhaps even more than they realize. You see, many people go through life with very few friends, and even those who have friends may not have very strong bonds with their friends. But when John, Paul, and George first met, John was 16, Paul was 14, and George was 13. They forged a deep connection that should have lasted their entire lives. After all, they knew each other thoroughly, and they were incredibly close until John was 30, Paul was 28, and George was 27. And it goes without saying that Ringo, along with others like Mal Evans and Tony Bramwell, also played significant roles in their lives. Then Yoko Ono entered the scene. Tony Bramwell, in his book Magical Mystery Tours, famously described her impact. He wrote, quote, "We weren't aware of it at the time. No one was. But she should have come with a warning stuck to her, like a cigarette packet, because gradually, inch by inch, she intruded into our lives." End quote. He goes on to depict the upheaval that she brought, likening her influence to that of a destructive storm. Based on my conversations with countless Beatles fans, I can say that the resentment towards Yoko stems in great part from how John's relationships with his closest friends and bandmates, his chosen family, suffered, despite typical disputes among friends, families, and coworkers, which often heal over time. The rifts within the Beatles did not. Beatles fans cherished the friendship and camaraderie among John, Paul, George, and Ringo. If fans couldn't have such relationships themselves in their own lives, they at least enjoyed seeing them exist, even if it was just a myth among the Beatles, who they admired for their integrity, family values, hard work, and immense musical talent. while it's argued that Yoko Ono did not break up the Beatles, perhaps she could have played a role in keeping them together instead of reaching a point of deep conflict fueled by John's anger and substance abuse issues, including, once he met Yoko Ono, heroin. The narrative that Beatles fans were sold was of a great love story, yet it left a trail of bitterness. If Yoko Ono was the visionary genius that she and John always claimed she was, why didn't they foresee the consequences of her behavior? Beatles fans have told me repeatedly that she could have kept the Beatles from breaking apart. If she truly loved John Lennon, she could have said, quote, "John, if you decide to sever your friendships and Apple business ventures to be with me exclusively, you are going to come across poorly, and I will be resented for it. This isn't the wisest path forward. It would be better if you and Paul and George and Ringo periodically pursued solo projects, support one another, offer help, and provide encouragement to each other. Then, at least once a year, gather together, just you guys, free from drugs, alcohol, romantic partners, and other distractions. Use that time with your friends to create something truly amazing for your fans. Be fair, be kind, be loving. Remember, the whole world is keeping an eye on us. Let's do what's best for you, your family and friends, your business and career, and your fans. If you do all that, then we, as a couple, will be happier." End quote. But she never said anything like that. Instead, Beatles fans have always been angry that she just sort of sat back and watched as the Beatles disintegrated. And of course, some say she played a major role in that disintegration by clinging to John while he was trying to work with his bandmates.
John,
Anything you say, dear.
John, John, yes!
Something that no other girlfriend or wife had ever done before. Just like she played a role in instigating John's divorce, John's abandonment of and alienation from his only child, Julian, the sudden turning away from his immediate and extended family and lifelong friends, and ultimately his move to New York, a place where he had no friends, no family, no contacts, or anybody except her, because it was a place that she preferred, supposedly telling him that she was some sort of bigwig in the Fluxus movement there, and where, it's been said, the two of them could publicly harass President Nixon, and where, in 1980, his life tragically ended. Once again, I am not saying that I agree with any of the above, or that all Beatles fans agree with everything I mentioned, but many do, and I get asked about this all the time. In fact, the reasons Beatles fans have for disliking Yoko Ono are beyond everything that I've mentioned so far, and so I will explore more in part 2. But fundamentally, what I have learned over the course of time is that Beatles fans lament that John Lennon sacrificed his family and his friendships and a brilliant career for what appeared to be a mentally unhealthy relationship that appeared more codependent than genuine loving, a harsh trade-off for him and those around him.
Yoko?
John,
Yoko!
John.
Yoko!
So, what do you think of the reasons I mentioned that Beatles fans hate Yoko Ono? Do you agree with any of them? Do you agree with all of them? Do you have any other reasons that I have not yet mentioned? If so, please let me know in the comments below. By the way, I do not know who took some of the photos that I've shown in the show, so if you do, will you kindly let me know so I can respectfully give them the credit that they deserve? Kindly remember to like, share, and subscribe and hit the notification bell, because there will be more shows like this one, and I hope you check those out too. Please check out the links below to learn how to support my research and productions. Specifically, I'd really appreciate it if you could become a member of my channel and or join me on Patreon. You could also leave a super thanks in the comments below. Kindly be kind to all fellow Earthlings, and please do not harm them, and please don't eat them. They don't like that. Remember, for the benefit of compassion for all living things and their own health, brilliant people throughout history, including all of the Beatles, chose, at one point or another, a plant-based diet. And please do yourself a favor and go to a local shelter and adopt a cat or a dog or both. You and they will be very glad that you did. Until next time, I wish you safe travels on all your journeys.